What you're trying to create effectively is asymmetric risk, which is, as the buyer, you're protecting your downside but allowing upside. And if you think about it, if you went to a casino and every bet you made you can't lose, but you could win, you'd bet every penny in your pocket, wouldn't you? And that's effectively what we're trying to mimic. We're trying to create a scenario where the downside is protected but the upside is still intact.
Guys, Matt Haycox here, and welcome to another episode of the Matt Haycox Show, here from Dubai. And I've got with me today a good friend and a guy I'm very interested to talk to, and I know that you guys are going to benefit very much too. I have with me Jeremy Harbour, who is founder of the Harbour Club, and he is a business buying extraordinaire, not just buying businesses, but buying them for little to no money down and with really creative deal structures. So, Jeremy and I are friends over here, like I say, and I love to pick his brains. And one of the best things for me about this podcast is that I always get to sit down with guests that I want to talk to, and I can kind of dig deeper and pick their brains even more. But you guys get to listen and watch at the benefit of that too. So this one's going to be a special one. Welcome, cool. Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
They're funny, these microphones, aren't
I know,
they?
yeah.
First time I've done one like this. I feel like I'm a robot. Elon Musk's
The next generation
creations.
one will follow you around, but for now we'll have to go manual.
So I've given I guess a brief and probably very butchered overview of you. Just tell me how it started, because I actually don't know what
the origin story. Yeah. I said to you after knowing you for about a year that I just Googled you for the first time, and
cut.
But it is one of those things where you can actually spend a lot of time with someone and still not understand where they're from. But look, my kind of origin story has been repeated a million times online, and anyone can Google me and kind of look it up. But the kind of potted history was startup entrepreneur, doing starting businesses, working my nuts off, trying to grow them, hustling, the traditional thing from a very young age. Started very young, left school at 15 to pursue a business that I'd started, so I didn't finish high school, the UK equivalent of, and that business spectacularly failed when I was 18. Brushed myself off and got into telecoms and started a business in that. Telecoms just happened to be going through a massive consolidation at that time. It was the mid-1990s. The mobile phone industry had boomed, and then everybody was buying everybody else. So it was a business that was kind of eating itself at the time. And so if you were in that industry, you were either being acquired or you were an acquirer. And that the market was saturated. Winning new business was getting harder and harder. And so the next way to grow your business was to buy a competitor down the road. And very simply, I sat there in my office having these meetings. I always took meetings. It beat the shit out of actually working during the day. So I'd always have these meetings, and these people would sit opposite me and try and buy my company. And very quickly I realized the one thing they all had in common is none of them had any money. And literally my thought process was, I don't have any money either. I should be on the other side of the table, and literally flipped it to me going and meeting people and trying to buy their business without using any of my own money. And that was kind of it in a nutshell. That was the genesis of the whole thing. And
before starting out with your original startup business, did you always know that you wanted to be in business?
Yeah, there's that kind of nature or nurture type thing that people always talk about, and for me, I think it definitely was nature. So I remember getting in trouble with my parents at 7 years old because I'd cut all the flowers down in the garden, stuck them in jam jars, and was sitting on the street trying to sell them. So I definitely had that kind of thing. And also growing up, I grew up on a farm. And so I could go and feed the animals on the farm after school for £1 an hour. And so that was my pocket money. So if I didn't feed animals after school, I didn't get any money. And so that gets your kind of creative juices flowing as to how can I make more than £1 an hour? There must be something I can do to make more than £1 an hour. And that was really, I guess the kind of the first kind of thoughts of micro businesses. And also my dad being a farmer, farming is seasonal, so they always have side hustles as well. So I guess I grew up in an environment where there was always a side hustle and this desire to make more than £1 an hour, basically.
So you sat in this meeting, or lots of these meetings where people are trying to buy your business, but have no money to pay you. You decide to be on the other side of the table. How do you actually go about it from there? Did you know what you were doing?
No, and actually I think that helps a lot, because if you realize the magnitude of what you're trying to achieve, sometimes you won't do it. And I think entrepreneurs, and you must know this, some of the people you meet that are incredibly wealthy, they're definitely not smarter than other people. And I think sometimes people can be too smart for their own good, because they're able to then rationalize the full gravity of what they're about to take on and then decide it's too scary to do. Whereas I think when you're a bit young and dumb, you kind of just bowl into stuff, find yourself out of your depth, and then figure it out. And that's actually not a bad learning methodology. It's the equivalent of being pushed off the edge of the pier and swimming back, as a swimming lesson. So I think having that bit of bravado just to go in and try it. I was a cocky little kid. The going bust bit taught me a good dose of humility, so that was very helpful. But the having that ability to go in and then learn as you go, served me really well at that time, because I literally didn't know what I was doing. And also, I was very implausible. I was, I think when I did my first deal, I was about 22 or 23 years old, and I would describe it as a late shaver. I always looked really young from, well into my kind of 30s. I still looked like I was in my late teens, early 20s, and then it all went wrong somehow. Basically, I was very implausible, approaching these people, bashing my head against a wall to a great extent. But one thing, there was a few benefits. One of them was when I used to go to networking meetings. I had a telecoms company, so when I went to networking meetings, I always used to look at people like in terms of their phone bill, like how much do you spend on your phones? And I was the shark, I was the hunter, the salesperson that wanted to get their phone bill to move from their current provider over to me. When I started looking to buy businesses, suddenly I became a lot more interesting, because when you walk into a room full of people and you're a salesperson, you're basically like a threat, and everybody tries to hide from you because you're going to pin them in a corner and sell them phones. When I went in there and said, I've got a phone company, I'm looking at buying another one, even though I was a bit young and implausible, I was definitely interesting. So you would have a lot more interesting conversations with people in those sort of environments.
I think people, just naturally want to believe in other people anyway, don't they? And even if people, even if your ideas are crazy or maybe implausible, I think the vast majority of people, whether it's subconsciously or actively, they get excited about it, and they do buy into you, even if it may be an unlikely outcome.
Yeah, and look, that whole process involved, kissing a lot of frogs. I had a lot of meetings where people would pretty much laugh, or in most cases not laugh, but politely decline my offers, and you have to try and reposition those offers until you find exactly the right kind of way to crack it. And eventually, I found a mobile phone shop. It was literally down the road from us. We were in Hertfordshire at the time. This was in a place called Slough, and Slough had a huge industrial estate. It's the largest commercial industrial estate in Europe, and so
and the home of Ali G.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, the East Staines Massive or whatever it was. So he, so this particular place basically serviced the whole of this industrial estate and had great customers. They had about 600 corporate customers. Nintendo was one of their clients, and a whole bunch of others. But basically, business was in a bit of a pickle. As I said, the market had matured, so he wasn't winning as many new customers anymore, which would pretty much the thing that paid the rent. He was just churning his existing base and upgrading people and doing that sort of stuff. Plus, the building that he was in was going to be demolished and turned into apartments. So he was looking for a new retail outlet that he could move to. And in that area, believe it or not, it's actually quite expensive to have retail. You've got Stoke Park just up the road, and it's like a little micro economy in terms of the retail outlets there. So he was looking at having to spend maybe 60, 70 grand just to relocate and making 12 grand a year of net profit. And so there was a motivation there to get out of the business. He had another business that he was more interested in anyway. And there was a ticking time bomb that the place was about to be bulldozed. So my kind of ineptitude in how to structure the deal and how to get it over the line was counterbalanced by his desperation and the fact that there was a clock ticking. He insisted that I had to give money for the business. I insisted that I couldn't, and basically when the time ran out, he agreed with me. And so it was a scrappy little deal and quite a small deal, but for us as a telecoms company at the time, it was a year's worth of sales, and we did it in an afternoon, and we spent nothing on sales and from an epiphany perspective, from a game changer perspective, it was a massive step forward. And the confidence and experience that came from doing that one deal, I mean, literally just stupid stuff like how do you do the legals, how do you transfer the shares over, how do you close the old company down, and all the little things that we had to figure out in order to do a deal basically gives you like a step up in terms of your own experience, and that obviously then comes across when you meet other people, because 2 weeks later I did my second deal, so it was literally like a cork had popped, and not non-stop after that basically.
So question on this then, because and this was something that it took me a lot of time to get my head around in the beginning, when I used to start to understand about buying businesses, and I'm sure it's something that people listening to this are thinking about. You talk about how he wanted money, and he was insistent on wanting money, and you were insistent that you wouldn't or didn't have any to give, and that it was going to be very low risk for you. I mean, how do you convince a vendor in that situation, to sell a business on those terms? Because I think everyone's initial expectation would be anyone who's prepared to sell a business for where they're taking all the risk in selling and receiving little money at the beginning, the business must be shit. It would be the natural expectation.
Yeah.
Because that as much as that guy may be desperate to sell his business, if he's actually making some money or he owns some assets, is he not better off just liquidating it rather than selling it to you, losing all control? You accidentally fuck it up or purposefully screw him, and he's got nowhere to turn.
Yeah, look, you're not going to buy Apple on that basis, or so. But when you look at SME companies, they're all a bit shit, to be honest. If you look at any small to medium sized company, if they lose a couple of key staff or a couple of key customers, it's a game changer, and the whole thing can be done. The whole business can disappear. So you also have to look at the flip side of it as to where do you deploy capital, because effectively small businesses are an incredibly volatile asset class. I mean, like I say, the whole thing can evaporate in a moment. Amazon could do it for free, or Google could do it for free, and suddenly you have a massive problem in your industry. And so, they are very volatile assets. So by the same token, do you really want to be putting capital into a very volatile asset? And if you do put capital, what's the risk-weighted return you should expect from that capital? Because, there are, you can buy a 2-year treasury bond at the moment that will give you 5% a year, and there's loads of really good investments now because interest rates are rising. There's loads of really good investments now that will give you a low double digit return. So when people talk about selling a small business and wanting 10 times earnings, well, 10 times earnings is 10% return on capital, but you're in a completely fucked up, illiquid, risky asset class. And so there is a dose of realization that small business owners need to have about fair pricing. And then the other dose of reality is about just the audience they have for their business. So if you look at $100 million plus enterprise value businesses, there is a large audience of potential buyers, private equity funds, SPACs that are sitting on cash. I think there's 3 trillion in PE at the moment looking for a home. So supply and demand economics, when there's lots of demand and not much supply, prices go up and it all looks wonderful. But as you move down the food chain, the audience gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you find a business that's doing 1 to 5 million in revenue, there are almost no buyers, almost no natural buyers in that space. There might be a couple of trade buyers that will go and pick stuff up, but equally they'll probably be looking at low money down or no money down type structures for acquiring those companies. And look, when there's low money down or no money down, it doesn't mean they're getting no money. It just means that the deal is going to be structured so they receive their money over a period of time. And what you're trying to create effectively is asymmetric risk, which is, as the buyer, you're protecting your downside but allowing upside. And if you think about it, if you went to a casino and every bet you made you can't lose, but you could win, you'd bet every penny in your pocket, wouldn't you? And that's effectively what we're trying to mimic. We're trying to create a scenario where the downside is protected, but the upside is still intact. And sometimes we might have to sacrifice some of the upside to make sure that there's no downside. So a common example of that is the person that wants to achieve maybe a slightly unrealistic value for their business, and you can help them achieve that, but they have to work with you for you to pay them out of the business over a period of time. So what you might find is that you're buying a business for $500,000 that you could probably get for 300 grand in cash. But in order for them to get the $500,000, they've got to work with you to get to that figure. And then from their perspective, the headline is more attractive to them. And if they believe that you can actually deliver on that stuff, or they believe they can put the security in place around it that that protects them, you can probably get that deal away. But every deal is different, and I mean we have many different deal structures that we use to approach people. Some of them we use, public companies where we issue bonds, and we use the bonds as consideration. So they actually have a regulated financial product that pays them money every month. So it's not like just give us the business and hope everything is okay. There's a firmer structure sitting behind it, but that's for bigger companies. But at that smaller end, it really is a buyer's market. There are not a lot of natural buyers for these businesses, and that gives us most of the strength in the negotiation.
So you've partially answered one of my questions, actually, or one of the questions I was going to ask you about. What does an ideal acquisition candidate look like? I mean, you've said that in the market, businesses turning over between 1 and 5 million have very limited buyers. I mean, what other characteristics may profitability or loss making or
no? So profit making or loss making both work well. Most people in my Harbour Club community prefer profitable. Obviously profitable companies that spit off cash. That works a lot better for them, and that doesn't hamper getting a deal done. There are different deal. I can come on to some deal structures later. One point I would say is below $1 million, it's often hard to do something.
Below $1 million turnover.
Yeah. Once you take the owner out, often the owner is doing the job of 3 people for the salary of half a person. So you can't really replace them very effectively. And also they tend to be kind of one customer centric or one product centric at that point. They haven't really evolved. Now, obviously, industries are different. That might be $500,000 or 800 grand or something. But generally speaking, we like to look at $1 million plus. Above 5 million, the audience of potential buyers starts to get a bit thicker, so you get more trade buyers that can afford to do the due diligence to look at it to do an acquisition. We've done deals in so many sectors. It's not true, but if I was to say there was a weighting, I would say that more than half the deals that are completed in the Harbour Club community are what I would describe as blue collar businesses, or businesses where you wouldn't wear a suit to go to work. So engineering businesses, cleaning businesses, heating, ventilation, air conditioning companies, the kind of man in van type businesses. And often these are the most cash generative, best businesses to be involved in. They often have, contracted revenues or maintenance contracts. They actually look really good when you analyze them. But they suffer the most from having a natural succession plan. So kids don't want to take them over. Second layer of management probably isn't sophisticated enough to take them over in terms of the operating the finances and stuff of the company. So they tend not to have a natural succession built in, and then there comes a time where they want to move on and they need to find a home for it. And again, the other competitors are often in the same position, that they're looking for the same solution. So they don't particularly have the appetite to buy up more companies in the same space. So we see a lot of deals happen in that area, and I think for those reasons.
I mean, I know you've got your Harbour Club, which we can talk about in a minute, which is a great flow of deals, great source of deal flow for you. I mean, for guys listening to this who, I guess, want to start to get into the market to look to acquire businesses, what's your view on business agents? And it's a bit of a leading question because, I mean, I always, come across either business agents contacting me to say, oh, that business you own, we can flog it for you at this price, or, other people looking to buy a business and therefore looking for funding from it, and the prices and the valuations are just absolutely fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
And I mean, I never get deep enough into the conversations to understand if these guys are just pitching you high to get you excited, and then they'll chip you along, or if it's just a fee-based business because they try and take a couple of grand off everyone as a listing fee. I mean, is the value for someone who wants to acquire businesses to go and make relationships with business agents?
No.
That was quick and short. Next question.
Yeah. So brokers should always carry a pot plant with them to compensate for their waste of oxygen on the planet. That really, look, there are some good business brokers, and I've met a few who do buck the trend. But 99% of that industry is incredibly scammy. Basically, their business model is selling listings. They charge you a fee up front, anything from a couple of grand to 40 grand up front to list your business. It's those listing fees that keep the lights on. And so they will tell you anything to get you listed. And it's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever advertised your car. You get those people who ring you up and go, hey, I've got a buyer for your car. He's sitting here with a bag of cash. Yeah. All you need to do is register with us. It's $39.99 and we'll put your ad up and I'll introduce you to him. It's a fucking scam. It's bullshit. It's the oldest one in the book. And yet they get away with it again and again and again. And their contracts are quite punitive. So what happens is they sign you up, do fuck all, and you find a buyer and they get paid because of the contract they've signed you into. And so, from their perspective, they're selling listings. If they accidentally sell a business, it's a bonus. And
it's literally as bad as just selling the listing. It's not even.
Well, they will mail their database, and that will generate a half a dozen tire kickers that makes you feel like they're doing a good job. And they'll probably list it on businessesforsale.com, which you can do for 39 quid. And that will get another bunch of tire kickers, or probably people that have watched my content but haven't done the course yet. So
I see
we'll bring them up and try and buy them for £1.
I see a lot with pubs and leisure properties as well, because obviously that's a core business for me and always has been. Yeah. And if you ever see a pub for sale with the likes of an Ernest Young or someone like that, you always know there's no point even engaging with this buyer, this seller rather, because he's had his expectations so ridiculously set high. Yeah. And if I buy pubs and bars, it's from the likes of a Florette's or a Christie's, like a credible industry specialist who offers a price which is realistic to the market.
My advice to all people when they come into the Harbour Club is, you can use brokers. Let's say you're inexperienced when it comes to, you don't know any of the terminology, things like what's EBITDA, what's P&L, what's, if you don't know this kind of terminology and M&A terminology particularly, and you don't understand accounts and looking at accounts and things like that, then by all means sign up to a broker and get bombarded with shit that you can analyze and look at and get used to the language, because that it will help your education in terms of just getting you from zero to sounding a little bit like you know what you're talking about. So by all means register with the broker and get some information. But in terms of actually identifying a deal, the best thing you can do is think about the industry that you're going to be acquiring in. It needs to be an industry where you can build rapport and empathy with the business owner. So it helps if you know a little bit about the industry, or perhaps some of the key characters in that industry, or the latest scandal that's gone on in that industry, because that's going to really help you in that rapport building part of the process when you first meet people. So pick the industry, and then just set yourself a goal of speaking to business owners in that industry. Hit them up on LinkedIn, go to their conferences and shows that relate to that industry, and just meet as many business owners in that space as you can. No agenda around buying their company. You can say that you're an investor in that industry and you're looking for opportunities to invest. That's a great way of getting people to talk to you. But basically just go and do fact finding, find out what the pain points are, find out where the challenges are, and you'll be amazed from those open conversations how many of them would be for sale under the right circumstances, or how many of them actually have synergistic problems. So you'll find, maybe one has a young, hungry management team, but it's still quite a small company and they aggressively want to grow. And there'll be another one that's really big and it's got a 70-year-old owner who really wants to move on but can't find anyone to run the business. Well, obviously, if you put those two together, you've got a young, hungry management team that could take over running his business and solve the succession. So, that's a potential merger. And a merger is probably the simplest no money down strategy to execute, because a merger is an acquisition where you use shares to acquire a company instead of cash. So by effectively using the shares of one company to buy the other one, you create a new co, and then again that becomes more sellable because you've got something bigger now that you can go out and sell. So yeah.
So let's talk about actual deal structure then. I mean, obviously earlier on we were talking about matching matching risk and matching cash flow, etc. I mean, is that the name of the game to to take a business that's, for argument's sake, making 400 grand, that wants 400 grand to buy it, that's making 100 grand a year? Do you try and structure that deal as paying them over 4 years?
It can be, yeah. So look, the simplest no money down is just deferred payment. So deferred payment is just, I'm going to pay you some money over a period of time. But look, and I've seen it work lots of times, and often where people just want to get out of the business and want somebody else to take it over, and if they can find a safe pair of hands, they'll do that deal. But in most cases, if you let's say you approach a baby boomer who's been running this business for 40 years, this is a sophisticated, been around the block entrepreneur. You're not going to pull any wool over anybody's eyes or get away with anything. This is not about tricking them into giving you their business for nothing. But what you will often find is if you went to that baby boomer and said, I'm going to pay you $500,000 for your business, but I'm going to pay it over the next 5 years. And he goes, well, hang on, I make 100 grand a year. So you're just giving me my money over the next 5 years. No thanks. That will be the most common answer in that situation. In more than 80% of cases, it will be a polite no or an impolite no. And so one of the strategies that we use in the Harbour Club is something we call the WIBO, the work-in buyout. And we often, there's many different ways you can start this conversation, but one of the ways we do is we have a piece of software called Valatoa, which is actually uniquely licensed to the Harbour Club, but it's a real valuation tool. And basically, you go through this questionnaire with the business owner. It spits out a 30-page report on what the business is worth, and all the areas that you could improve the business for it to be worth more. And like I said, every business is a bit shit. So in small businesses, you will often find they are in no way prepared to be sold. It's one of the reasons why brokers can't sell businesses, because small businesses aren't very sellable in that they don't have a data room with all of the due diligence info in one place. They don't have their accounts properly together. They've got personal expenses running through there. They've got all sorts of exceptional items, just not run in a professional way. They haven't got the systems and processes in place that would enable them to hand over to new management particularly easily. It's all in here and those kind of things. So basically then, you can say to them, look, here's the list of things you need to do before this business is going to be viable. Now, somebody who's in their 70s, who's been doing it their way for the last 40 years, when they look at, digitizing the business, changing the way you deal with the accounts, setting up a virtual data room, generally they'll look at that and go, I can't be arsed. So you then offer to basically do that piece of work for them. And you can say, look, it's going to take 4 or 5 months to do all of this stuff, but it's going to have a notable impact on the ability to sell the business, not necessarily the valuation, but just the ability to actually get a buyer to buy it. And so how about you pay me, figure out a number they can afford, a grand a month, 5 grand a month, whatever it is, for 5 months. I'll do this list of things inside the business for you. And if I can achieve these parameters, you'll give me 20% of the company as a bonus at the end of it. And the parameters normally around cash flow or profit improvement, which is some of the areas that we can help with this plan. You then go in and do your 6-month contract with them. Sometimes the Harbour Clubber does this themselves and immerses themselves in the business. It's the best due diligence you can ever do on a company, is to work there for 6 months. Other times they outsource that process to somebody else, and there's a whole bunch of people in the Harbour Club community who do this for people on split the retainer, and they'll go in and do the grunt work. But at the end of that 6 months, you get your 20%, and now with that baby boomer entrepreneur, you're a guy that came in, transformed their business, and are now a 20% shareholder. So you've basically promised you'll do something, and then you did it. Now, in this life, if somebody says they're going to do something and they actually do it, they're in the top fucking 1% of humanity. They're a rare beast indeed. And so when it then comes to, okay, should we sell it now? Because we've made it sellable, or if you like, I can buy the other 80% off you, and I'm going to pay you over 5 years.
But you've already built that trust.
You've built the trust, you've built the rapport, you're the safe pair of hands, and they're generally more than happy to then sell you the balance of it. So over 6 months, you bought it, no money down, and you've got a profitable, cash flowing business at the end of that process, and you've been paid while you do it. And the worst outcome is you just sell it, and get you 20% of the upside. Although selling them is a little bit harder, but yeah, it's a great way to effectively end up with a business. So that's just an example. We call that WIBO, work in buyout, as a strategy. Like I say, within the Harbour Club, there's loads of people. There's people doing this on a wholesale basis. We've got one guy that's done 28 of them now, and he's taking on average $5,000 a month out of each one.
What, 28 work in buyouts?
28 work in buyouts, yeah. And he actually splits them into groups of 10 and puts them all in a room together once a month and does like a big brainstorming session where they all solve each other's problems.
Oh, wow.
So that's working really, really well for him. It's almost limitlessly scalable, actually, particularly if he starts outsourcing the going in and doing the work part of it.
Let's talk about some other deal structures that would be relevant for people starting this journey at the beginning.
Yeah, look, the WIBO one, the reason I brought it up was it is kind of the path of least resistance for a newbie. So, obviously our Valator report is one way of approaching that client. The most common way people do it is actually, what are you good at? Most people have a skill. They're good at marketing, or they're good at HR, or they've been involved in IT or something like that. Could you bring those skills to bear in exchange for equity in a company? So can you go in and solve a problem for that company and receive some equity in return? So for consultants and coaches, that's really easy. That's just a quick flip. At the moment they're selling their time for money. How about they sell their time for equity? That's a really simple transition. That guy that we've got that's done 28 of them, he's been selling consultancy for the last 30 years. So he just switched his consultancy sale to an equity-based performance fee, and completely transformed his whole wealth outlook. So I think the path of least resistance to breaking your deal virginity is probably something like this, because it's much easier to persuade somebody to part with a percentage of their business than it is the whole thing. But then you can come back for the whole thing relatively easily after that. So that's probably the simplest to actually go, because we cover everything from distressed deals to IPOs on the Harbour Club, but both of those two extremes are actually quite technically challenging. So distressed acquisitions, you need to know what you're doing, otherwise people's livelihoods are really at risk, and likewise at the IPO stage, you need to be relatively sophisticated to pull those kind of transactions off as well.
Obviously for any business buying or business selling transaction, you're going to need your professional advisors on board. Do you find that in your more creative structures that your typical professional advisors struggle to get their head around this? Do you think you need specialist people?
Yeah, a little bit. So look at the kind of capital markets IPO end of the spectrum. That's dead straightforward. There are securities lawyers, all over the place. We have our own in-house counsel plus several external firms that we use. At the really, the lower end of the market, the distressed deals, the WIBOs and things like that, actually, most people don't use lawyers. Most people will suggest the other party takes legal advice on the agreement, but that we do the agreement between us.
Okay.
Just because if you're not careful, you can run up 30-40 grand's worth of legal fees doing a deal for £1, and it just doesn't make, again, it's that asymmetric risk thing. It doesn't make sense to do that. The first deal that I ever did, that mobile phone business in Slough, I couldn't afford a lawyer. The guy was asking me to give him £2,000 down on the deal, and I couldn't give it to him. So there was no way I was giving £2,000 to a lawyer to write an agreement.
You just pulled your contract off the internet or scribbled it on a piece of paper?
We just wrote a letter. And we both signed it. And so we wrote a letter explaining the terms of the transaction, and we both signed it at the bottom. You have to remember, in law, contracts are relatively straightforward in terms of what constitutes a contract in law, with an invitation, an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. So as long as you can show those four components exist, then there is a binding contract in law. And then the terms of those contracts are, the worst case scenario is you end up in front of a judge and he's trying to interpret what you meant when you wrote this agreement. Well, if you write a plain English one sentence, there's not much interpretation. It's pretty much black and white what it means. When you have a 30-page agreement that a lawyer will draft that has, fucking a whole ton of nonsense, well, that requires an awful lot of analysis to understand exactly what it was that you meant when you signed this agreement. And so sometimes the intent gets lost in the lawyer drafted agreement, whereas it's absolutely abundantly clear in the kind of self-drafted one. I would caveat that with, this is not advice. I don't want people running around trying to do their own contracts. If you don't feel competent or confident enough to do your own agreement, you definitely shouldn't do it. It's but if you do feel confident and competent enough, and you understand the risk that you're taking, then I don't think there's a particular challenge in getting on and doing some of these things yourself.
And what's the flip side of this then? So you've gone out there, you've found a business, you've acquired it, you've maybe even acquired a couple. What about the sales side of it? Because I guess the way you want to buy your business probably isn't the way you want to sell it. I mean, you'd like to buy it for no money down and sell it for 100% on day one. So I mean, where do you go? What's the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're then into the kind of the traditional sales type model, and selling small businesses is much harder than buying them. Like I say, there isn't a massive audience for these businesses. So there's a few things you have to do to be right at the front of the queue. And these are the things that brokers could easily do and actually add value, but none of them do. And that is to have a really good information memorandum around the business. Ideally audit the business, or at least have it audit ready, because one of the biggest challenges with small businesses is director signed off financial statements that basically can be made up. I mean, a director will sign anything, so having it audited adds a huge amount of credibility to the transaction. Actually repositioning the accounts for profit. So you'll often find that a business you pick up that's doing 100 grand a year, if you change the accounting treatment, can be making 2 or 3 times that. What I mean by accounting treatment is there are lots of different ways that you can recognize costs in the accounts, and there are lots of different ways you can recognize revenue in the accounts. And more often than not, the entrepreneur doesn't have any say in this. The accountant just picks the one that's most tax efficient. Well, we'd actually like the one that's the least tax efficient, because that means it shows more profit, and that will make the business effectively look a lot better from the curb appeal perspective, and that widens the audience of potential buyers, because the potential buyers tend to like more profitable things. And then the other thing is also being prepared to do a deal structure. You don't want to necessarily do the same one that we bought it on the basis of, but you also have to recognize you're not going to get 100% up front. So some areas where we help buyers is we try and pre-arrange finance on the business. So we figure out how much we can leverage it by, and then we say to them, by the way, this finance company will give you, $500,000. How much can you put on the table? Another 200 grand. Okay, that's 700 grand. How much could you pay us over the next 5 years? 500 grand. Okay, we're at one point, whatever. And then let's stick some earn out on there. Now, what's interesting is brokers will often advise clients not to take deferred payment and not to take earnout. I believe that if you refuse to take deferred payment and you refuse to take earnout, you're just leaving a ton of money on the table that could be there otherwise. Deferred payment is really the bit you negotiate after you've agreed on the upfront money they're paying. So it's almost like a bonus. It's almost like extra money that you're going to get every year. An earnout is a sum of money that's linked to a specific performance. So the business has to do something in order for you to get it. And that's why people don't like it, because they feel like I'm being sucked into a job in the business where I'm going to get commission. Well, actually, no, it's kind of the icing on the cake. What you're basically saying is, if this business is a complete shitbox, I'm going to get nothing. But if you hit it out the park and you're incredibly successful, I want a piece. Why wouldn't you do that? It's a asymmetric bet. It's a bet you can't lose. So if you're ever given a bet you can't lose, you should take the bet. I think a lot of people have this ringing in their ears: no earn out, no earn out, no earn out. But they haven't actually sat down and thought about what that means in practical terms or in reality. And so it's I
mean, I guess the key takeaway here for anyone looking to sell a business is that selling a business is a business in itself, and there's always that disparity between business founders and CEOs. The people who've had the idea, who've been the entrepreneur, probably aren't the best person to run that business, but forcefully put themselves in that situation and ultimately do themselves down. And I guess this is like the third step in that journey, that when it comes to selling the business, not only do you need the right expert advice, you need months, if not potentially years of preparation of getting all the pieces in place, to be able to get that maximum price.
Yeah, I mean, look, I took a view on this a while back, because what I used to do is keep the businesses for far too long on the basis that I'm trying to rinse every last cent out of the exit value. And what I realized is actually there's kind of an optimum where the whole preparing for sale process takes about 100 days. It's about a 90-day process to get everything in place that it looks sensible to a potential buyer. The sale process after that can be 6 to 9 months, but can equally be, I had one that took 5 years to sell, and I've had ones that took 1 month to sell, but 6 to 9 months is probably a good average in terms of what it actually takes to sell them. And I think doing that, the 100-day turnaround and the 6 to 9 month exit is kind of the optimum, because it frees you up then to do the next one and the next one. What I found was that there's kind of a law of diminishing returns. And in fact, I was holding far too many businesses in 2009, ended up closing 3 of them. And if I'd been flipping those rather than trying to add more and more value, I would have had a significant addition to my personal wealth that I didn't end up having, because we ran straight into a global financial crisis. And then, lesson learned, I advise everybody that the right time to sell a business is now. That getting the capital in de-risks you, and you can then deploy the capital into passive investments that generate income that doesn't rely on your time input, and that's a really valuable place to get to. I told everybody that for years and years and years, and of course we've had years and years and years of relative stability, so everybody kind of kept buying businesses and keeping them. And then the pandemic was like Thanos snapping his fingers, and half the businesses fucking disappeared overnight, or ended up in so much debt that it's a matter of time before they disappear. And then we've got this forced recession that's going on at the moment, which is the central banks driving us off a cliff in order to fight inflation.
I was going to say, where do you see the next 12, 24 months for people like yourself, for people looking to buy businesses? Is there going to be even more opportunity than back in 08, 09?
Yeah, for sure. Never let a good recession go to waste. And it's horrible, because it does affect lots of people's lives, and it's no fun. And I've been through more than I'd like to have, but look, 2009, I did 12 transactions in 2009, but I was still early in my career. I didn't know that much at that time. This time around, obviously, I know a lot more. I have a lot more kind of skills and experience to bring to the table. There's going to be a sea of possible opportunities. Actually, the biggest opportunities we're seeing right now are people that did leverage buyouts and got completely over their skis. So lots of people were running around because debt was cheap. Everyone was running around buying businesses with debt. And you've now got the perfect storm of interest rates rising, customers spending less, and customers going bust in a lot of cases. So we were looking at one the other day where they just had £1 million bad debt. So you've got these great businesses that have been great businesses for 20, 30 years, and they're about to fall off a cliff because they're over leveraged and they can't survive. So there's a lot of opportunity in that space where people have been doing LBOs, and now you can effectively pick up the pieces and walk away with some really good, well-established revenue streams.
Well, look, I could go on for hours and hours picking your brains purely for my own purposes, but I'm conscious
we'll do that on the boat tomorrow.
Exactly, conscious of time and your busy day. But I guess before we go, where can people find you? And just tell us a little bit about the Harbour Club, because I guess that ties in with where people can find you. Yeah,
so just Google Jeremy Harbour, Harbour, the UK spelling, not the American spelling. And there's jeremyharbour.com. You can buy. I've got a book called Go Do Deals. If you buy it from my website, from jeremyharbour.com, or you can actually go to a URL which is godo.deals. If you buy the book from there, we also give you a 21-day free email course. And we don't generally promote the Harbour Club very much. What we tend to suggest...
And this is an email course teaching you some of the stuff we've talked today, how to buy businesses.
How to source companies, how to acquire them, how to turn them around, how to sell them. Yeah, we cover the whole lot. You get an email every day for 21 days, and each one breaks down a different component of it, because it's a vast topic. But each day breaks down a component of it. And we tend to prefer people go through that route rather than inquire about Harbour Club, because a lot of the people go, yeah, I want Harbour Club, but without fully realising the magnitude of what it is they might be embarking on. So the 21-day free email course is it's a Marmite for any British listener. It's a Marmite thing that they either love it or they hate it. And so they'll go through that process and they'll either think, fuck yeah, I can see myself doing this every day, I'm going to love this, or they go, no, this is too much. And so we'd much rather polarize people early on, and then they can decide if it's something they then want to learn more about and pursue and take on. So I'd highly recommend going that route.
Perfect. Well, listen, Jeremy, thanks a lot for being here, buddy. I'm sure we'll do a round two at some point in the future. Guys, I'm sure you enjoyed listening to that, watching that. Go find Jeremy at jeremyharbour.com. And as always, I'm the Matt Haycox, TheMattHaycox on all things social, and matt-haycox.com on the www. So I look forward to seeing you again in a future week with a future guest. Thanks again, Jeremy.
Ciao for now.